WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. Each and every Tuesday at 2:30, We Should Know is on the air. Star Communications, Channel 16, WCLN Radio, and of course the Summation, the local weekly newspaper here in the area. We're always fortunate to have folks of distinguished reputation and position join us on this show and talk about things that affects your life each and every day. Today is one of those days, and I was just so excited that the District Attorney for the 5th Prosecutorial District, Ernie Lee, is with us today. District Attorney, I want to thank you for being with us. I know your schedule a little bit, and it is unbelievable at the things and where you are and the time you're up in the morning. So to get here and be with us today, thank you for taking that time.
JW, it's great to be here. You do a great job with this show, and I appreciate this show for the citizens of Sampson County. It's great to be here. I got up early this morning, but it was well worth it. I enjoy coming over to Sampson County. I live over in Jacksonville, but I love the trip over here. I love Clinton, and I love the people of Sampson County.
Let's start out a little bit. I want to kind of start on 2 points, kind of 2 big points. The one thing I want to start with is to thank you for coming over and being part of an opioid conference, actually an opioid summit as it was called, at the Civic Center here last week. We had a huge turnout. You were one of the key speakers at that event, along with the Attorney General Josh Stein. We've looked at that from multiple angles, and somewhere along in this discussion I want to talk about that a bit more. But one of the things I wanted to open with today is to kind of give folks a little bit of not only a history lesson, but a big picture idea of the district attorney and what that job is. You're part of a lineage about 50, 60, 70 years.
70 years.
Tell us how that's unfolded and talk about that for a minute.
Well, until recently, we were actually the 4th Prosecutorial District. The legislature changed the numbering back on January 1st of 2019, so I became the 5th Prosecutorial District, but it's still the same 4 counties: Sampson, Duplin, Onslow, and Jones counties. We have been a district since the 1940s. And it goes back to 1949 when Walter Britt from Sampson County, a Sampson County native, was the elected district attorney. Of course, he was followed by Assistant District Attorney William H. Andrews, who was from Duplin County, but at that time lived in Onslow County. And then it switched to G. Dewey Hudson, who became the district attorney in 1999, who also worked for Bill Andrews. And then I became the district attorney in January of 2011 after working for both Bill Andrews and Dewey Hudson. So we've had a lot of continuity since 1949, 70 years. We've had 4 elected district attorneys. There have been some real pluses, some real positives for having that. It's allowed continuity in this district. We've not had a lot of turnover when a new DA comes in. That way we can use that experience from those assistant DAs, those legal assistants that were here. It also, we very much well know the sheriffs, the police chiefs, the clerks of court. I mean, we really are part of this community. 70 years since Walter Britt became the district attorney, and I'm the 4th one.
And continuity and understanding the people that work in your office, and when I say office, it should be plural because you have many offices, is critical to what you do. I can only imagine if somebody comes in with no background, no understanding of the job, no understanding of the people or the districts they serve, that could be somewhat chaotic.
Oh, absolutely. There's a big learning curve becoming district attorney. Fortunately, I was an assistant DA for 24 years. I worked under 2 great people, William H. Andrews and G. Dewey Hudson. They were different types of bosses, but I learned a lot from both of them, a tremendous amount. And so when I became the district attorney, I already knew all the players, the sheriffs, the clerks, the judges. I knew the staff already. I knew their strengths and I knew their weaknesses. I knew where I could best utilize them as I became the district attorney. I was familiar with the cases. And that's a big plus right there because I was able to jump in right after I became district attorney trying a first-degree murder trial, right out of the box. And so those type things are great because it just, first of all, there's not going to be this break where you've got to learn the job. You can actually step in and do the job from day one. And I can tell you, I was very fortunate. I knew Walter Britt. He used to stop by the office there in Onslow County when I was a young assistant DA, so I got to meet him. He was a wealth of knowledge and experience. Of course, Bill Andrews served for a very long time as district attorney. He was an ADA, then a district attorney. Again, a wealth of knowledge, a tremendous trial lawyer. I knew G. Dewey Hudson, who was also a very excellent trial attorney. I tried cases with both Dewey and Bill, murder cases, before I became the district attorney. And I tell you what, I think that's just a real plus. And I think it also allows us to give better service to the citizens of this district.
And part of your job and that job as district attorney, you are the representative of the people.
Oh, absolutely. I represent the state of North Carolina, but I represent the people of this district, which means those that commit crimes. It's my job to represent those that are victims, represent them on behalf of the state of North Carolina to make sure that justice is done.
Let's start with a big picture item also, and I think it's something that has weighed heavily on people. We just mentioned, or I just mentioned a while ago, your participation in the Opioid Summit here in Clinton. It's throughout the district, it's throughout the state and country. The national emergency health crisis that's been kind of proclaimed by the president, and this country is in the midst of that. How has this opioid crisis, folks being addicted to opioids, affected the overall view of how we view addiction and addictive substances? You recall back in the 98 era, in the 90s, we had the war on drugs.
Right.
Is this still a war? Is it still something that can be adjudicated out, or do we have to approach it from another way?
You know, I can tell you there's been some changes since the 1990s when I was an assistant DA. We're starting to look more at treatment in addition to punishment. Because I can tell you, I have dealt with so many cases through the years. I have tried a lot of drug cases, and the drugs of choice have changed. When I first started the DA's office, a lot of marijuana, a lot of cocaine. Then it moved to crack cocaine, and then it's moved to, now as we know now, all the opioids. But we've also had meth out there, and we also have heroin. So the drugs have changed, but the addictions remain the same. And one of the things I have noticed is there seems to be more emphasis on treatment. And I tell you what, I advocate that. Because you cannot use the prison system to make this better. It will not happen. Even if someone has to go to prison for possession of drugs or selling drugs or whatever the case may be, we still need to have the resources in place to give them treatment while in prison. Because a lot of these people go in, they're addicted. They come back out 3-4 years later. They go back right with the same crowd they were previously. They start using the same drugs again, and they're right back in jail. It is very costly for society. It's just a revolving wheel. It's the same people over and over and over. It's gotten to the point now, I started back in 1987. I am actually now prosecuting third-generation individuals from some of the people I prosecuted in the late 80s. Because now it's to their grandchildren that are actually using the drugs. And it's just a very, very sad situation. I am very much in favor of punishing those that sell drugs, that sell these type drugs for profit. I mean, I think they need to be punished, which means prison. However, I also recognize there's a lot of people out there that are not selling. These people are users. And these are the people that are charged and convicted of possessing. And those are the people we've got to try to reach, if we can. That means through treatment, and of course sometimes there's going to be some punishment, of course. But we've got to really emphasize more treatment.
How do you see the judicial part, the people that, when you walk in that courtroom, in your mind, I know you know all the judges in your district, is the judicial folks that sit on the bench, do they see what you see? Do they understand it from that perspective? I
have noticed, I believe there's also been a change in judiciary about the same issue, because a lot of them came up the same time I did. Back in the 90s, we were trying to just punish everyone, put everybody in prison, and that's not actually worked. We've got to save those prison beds for our most violent people and those people that are selling the drugs. And I've noticed there has been a change on the bench too. But the problem is that we don't have a lot of resources in the state of North Carolina. We have a lot of prisons, we have a lot of jails, we don't have a lot of treatment centers. For example, they just opened up a new treatment center there in Onslow County. And it's great to have it, but it's 16 beds. And I'm very grateful to have those 16 beds there in Jacksonville and Onslow County due to the large number of people addicted. However, 16 is not going to, it's just a drop in the bucket for the problem that we have out there. Especially when you look at Onslow County, and I'd like to mention also that you've got a
huge background and history as a JAG officer in the military. A lot of folks probably don't realize that. But that gives you a window and a view within the military structure of what the operational mechanisms are there as well. So as a former JAG officer, not only are you able to see kind of behind that curtain, you understand some of the mechanisms these soldiers are going through.
Oh, absolutely. I was a judge advocate for 22 years, served in the United States Army Reserve. I served both as defense counsel and also represented the government in some cases. So I got to see both sides of it. I actually represented quite a few soldiers with drug issues. So I've seen both sides of it. But also being a JAG officer has also helped me because Camp Lejeune, a very large Marine Corps installation, I deal with a lot of Marines there. We have a lot of Marine defendants. We have a lot of Marine victims. But I also deal with the JAG Corps over there. And since Cumberland County is right next to Sampson County, we also have some bleed over there from Fort Bragg. I'm very familiar with Fort Bragg because that's where I did a lot of my duty with the Army Reserve. That's where I represent quite a few soldiers. And so I'm very familiar with the military, and I grew up in a military family in addition to that. My dad was in the Air Force for 20 years. We lived all around the country in Air Force bases. My brother retired from the Air Force. He's up in North Dakota right now. So I have lived the military life for a very long time, and I also see the distinct issues there are, which actually gave me somewhat of an advantage when I became district attorney, because I knew how to deal with a lot of those issues.
And I think that advantage also is that what you just explained, and I hope folks is getting this picture here, you've not only lived a life of public service, but you've lived it within the structure of your family. You've lived it within what you have given back to the community. And I don't know exactly what year you're in now, but just explaining a while ago, the lineage of this, you're well over 25 years. So we're going to take our first break. When we come back, I want to talk a bit more about some of the things as it relates to addiction from maybe another perspective of what's happening with cannabis in our communities and where we're going from there. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking with the District Attorney for the 5th Prosecutorial District, District Attorney Ernie Lee. Hopefully there's some things in here that you'll pick up that may help you as we move forward in understanding our structure and the rule of law in this district.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thanks for being with us today. And again, we have the District Attorney from the 5th Prosecutorial District, District Attorney Ernie Lee, on behalf of the people here in the 5th District. Ernie, thank you for being with us. We kind of talked a little bit about the opioid crisis. There's another issue that I wanted to get into, and there's so much when we get together we could take a day and talk.
Absolutely.
But I want to talk about cannabis. We've had folks on from the commercial side. We've had folks on from North Carolina State University talking about the number of people that are either now growing cannabis. The segue with that is cannabis and its very near relative marijuana and the THC factor and those kinds of things. There is a rule of law that's in effect here, but yet we have 31 states now that is in some capacity involved, and many of them actually selling marijuana. Where are we at with that? And help us understand how you deal with that as a district attorney when we see the laws in the state, I'm not going to say at conflict, but there's some disarray with what the federal law is on it, but yet the states are moving in the opposite direction.
Yeah, there are a lot of states are. North Carolina is still a criminal offense to possess marijuana in the state of North Carolina, and we have different levels of that, all the way from simple possession all the way up to felony possession of marijuana. Right now, it is still against the law. Now, obviously, I think there's going to be some moves to address to see whether or not there should be limited circumstances where marijuana might be used for medical purposes. You know, I'm in favor of the current law of criminalizing the possession of marijuana, and I'll tell you why. I've been doing this for a very long time, and I've noticed in the past that those people, when I started off back in the 1980s, marijuana was really big. But I can also tell you that a lot of those people then moved to other drugs. They moved to cocaine. and then subsequently moved. There was a lot of LSD at that time, and subsequently, not everyone, but I just saw that progression
it's
so
kind of a
often.
gateway.
And I remember so many judges would actually ask the defendants when they come into court pleading guilty to different things, how did you get involved in, say, cocaine? I heard this repeatedly. I started with marijuana. Now, I'm not saying everybody's done that. Of course they haven't. But I just remember seeing that. It'd be young people. They would start in marijuana and they eventually would progress to other drugs. Now, again, that is a generalized statement. It does not apply to everyone, but it does give rise to concern, particularly for young people out there, because almost everyone that I've dealt with who later got in trouble for drugs or alcohol or whatever, they never one day said, I'm going to get up and I plan on using drugs. I want to be an alcoholic. I want to be addicted. Everyone always says, I can handle it. I will be different from everyone else that's ever tried it. And I saw these tragedies in court where these young people come in, the same story I just told, where they thought they could handle it, and they didn't. And that's what concerns me. But there is going to be a push, I think, in the state of North Carolina concerning this issue because it's around the country right now. The medical needs or benefits of marijuana or THC or cannabis. I see that being an issue in this legislature at some point.
And the other piece of that, when we look at it, is what has been touted as could easily be a very tremendous economic growth in which marijuana could bring as much as $3 or $4 billion into the state. And these other states, some of them are saying, hey, look at what we're doing. So is there something there that you're seeing as you talk to, and I know you're connected when talking to folks in the legislature, do you see what the sense are you getting there from the legislature?
I don't know where the legislature is going to go on this. I frankly do not. I go up there quite a bit for different issues. I do not know where they're going to head on this. Because one thing, though, even though there may be some cost benefits for the state of North Carolina, there's also going to be some negatives. And there almost is on every single thing. You've got to balance out the negatives and the positives to see which is best for the state of North Carolina. I mean, it goes back, with the lottery issues. There's pluses, there's minuses.
Absolutely.
And you've got to weigh all those things.
Trying to kind of transitioning, but yet somewhat in the same area, because you see a lot of interaction on something now that we refer to as social media. Right. We see a lot of what we call instantaneous, judgmental kinds of things happening. I want to kind of give you an opportunity to talk about what you see with that, looking back in the window that you have both in the past and of course in the future. There was a time we didn't have a concern with any of these issues, but now social media is affecting by many folks the idea that the rule of law is being affected to some degree by social media. Absolutely.
When I first started with the DA's office, very few people, I'm not even sure we had cell phones back when I started. But, and then of course it was some time before people actually started having cell phones. I can tell you those cell phones have changed things because now everyone has a computer in their hand, on their person almost at all times. And with this computer, this cell phone, you can record things, you can record yourself, you can record others, and you can immediately put it out on the World Wide Web, immediately. And I see that a lot. And I've also noticed through the years that what's happening is people are reading or seeing something on YouTube or whatever it might be on the website and treating it as the gospel without examining the issue to find out what are all the facts. And of course, anyone can put anything on a website and you can just put what you want people to see. You can edit what you want them to see. And I see so many people out there relying upon that. And so I would request that everyone, once you see something, just don't take it as truth. You need to investigate it yourself, which means check other reliable sources to make sure what you're seeing is accurate, because it may not be. Because many times people put this on, they have an agenda. And I've seen it. The criminal justice system, it happens a lot now, particularly with the officer-related shootings and things such as that. Because people will videotape maybe what's going on. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. However, it gets placed out there on the internet and people form their opinions immediately without hearing all the facts. One thing I've learned as district attorney, there's always more than one story. And somewhere in all those stories, there the truth lies. I've noticed that through the years, which means you've got to decide, where the truth is. I've had to do a lot of officer-involved shootings. I've had to do other cases where videos were released out to the public, not by law enforcement, by citizens of the public, in the public. I will be asked to comment about those. I will not give comments on those. I will always just basically say, look, I've got to look at the entire investigation. I will consider those videos, but I've got to look at the entire investigation. I'm very, I hold my cards close to me while I'm doing that investigation. And then once I do a release, I've got all sides. I've looked at everything, not just that one video that may be somewhat inflammatory. I've got to look at everything. You know, this is one thing, talking about social media though, is it has been also a great tool for law enforcement. And you've had law enforcement experience, you've dealt with a lot of law enforcement officers. I tell you what, now is amazing the number of defendants, those committing criminal offenses, that are videotaping themselves or putting messages out there about some of their criminal activities. And that has become a great tool for law enforcement, because we will go and check the Facebook. We will go and check the websites. We will get their computers, we will get their phones, and we will check those things to see what sites they've been on and what messages they've been sending out and what phone calls they've been making.
And do you discover oftentimes as you do that and you look at the investigatory evidence that you find that there's this network of criminal activity that may go from one small group and suddenly you're now into a bank robbery or suddenly you're now into heroin transportation and there's it's like just an underground.
There is. And it's amazing the number of transactions that are done on cell phones. And there's a record kept. And we will get a search warrant, a court order based upon probable cause, and seize those items. And of course, that's going to be during an active investigation. We're not going out just looking at everybody's cell phone. That's not, not doing that. But I'm talking about during criminal investigations. Just finished a case over in Jacksonville where a defendant had placed quite a few things on his cell phone, and we seized those text messages used against him in court.
Is that something that requires a search warrant to be able to seize that?
Absolutely.
Or if it's in plain sight and you can find it on Facebook on your phone, can you use it from that angle because it's public view? Or?
We can, however, we need to get the source. Because what we have may not be, we got to prove who actually submitted that item. Because just because it's a cell phone doesn't mean that you were using that cell phone at the time.
Right.
So that's the reason what we'll do is we'll actually get search warrants. It requires probable cause, which means a neutral, detached judicial official must determine, based upon law enforcement representations, that there's probable cause to believe that this phone needs to be seized. Again, that creates a check in there to make sure that we're just not there seizing everything. And I like that because we're a nation of laws.
Sure.
And we've got to go by the rules. But we can actually, based upon probable cause. But again, there's going to be a judge intervene, there's going to be a magistrate intervene. We're going to look at these things to make sure we have probable cause.
And that becomes the critical part of a discussion that we talked about before we went on air, this idea of understanding by not only folks that are involved in it, but there is this real reality that folks need to understand that we're a country of laws and the rule of law applies to everyone.
Absolutely. Look, we are a nation of laws. We have a Constitution that's proven the test of time for over 230 some years. We've got a government that stood the test of time. I challenge anyone to find another nation in this world that has had the type of transitions in power that we have had, where we don't have violence in the streets. We don't have those things when we have a new president come in. We have orderly elections, and then we have a transition of power both in our legislature and our executive branch. In addition to that, we have a neutral court system. And I said, our society works, our government works because, first of all, we've got a strong judiciary that serves as a check and balance on both the executive branch as well as the legislative branch. And we also have a strong press, a strong media. And we've got to have both those things.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to explore that a little bit more on the rule of law. I think it's something that we probably don't talk enough about.
Absolutely.
We maybe need to put that out there a bit more. We're going to take another break. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us. We're talking with Ernie Lee, the District Attorney for the 5th Prosecutorial District. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned, call a friend, tune in, Channel 16, Star Communications, WCLN Radio. We'll be back in a moment.
You come out to replace a bad sensor, and that adds a 5-year commitment to my contract, and you don't tell me? Here's your sign.
Switch to the sign that's keeping homes secure and customers happy all over the area. Security from Star Communications. We pride ourselves on fair pricing and quick, friendly service every time.
Somebody try to break into this place?
Security from Star Communications.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us. We Should Know is on the air. It's Tuesday, 2:30, each and every Tuesday. We've been coming to you now for a little over 8 years, I think, doing this. Had some wonderful guests on. One of those guests we have back today. We try to get him to come in often as we can, given his schedule. The District Attorney in the 5th Prosecutorial District, Ernie Lee. Many of you know that name. Many of you know the lineage of the District Attorney's office. Ernie, I want to thank you for being here. Always welcome at this table. We were talking as we went to break about social media and some of the kinds of things that happen on social media, but it does reach that kind of caveat that oftentimes people, and it amazes me, but they'll put stuff on social media that's obviously criminal, that's obviously things that, and it's out there for anybody to look at, and it's not going away. I mean, it's like archived.
Absolutely, and law enforcement can see it.
Yeah, it's like, wow, you just did that.
We see that quite a bit, and of course, it obviously helps the state of North Carolina. We're trying to prosecute these individuals. But I think a lot of people are just so brazen. And also, people just really want to sometimes brag about things they've done and show the rest of the world, look what I've done, whether it be legal or illegal. Mm-hmm. But of course, there's also a risk in that because we get a search warrant based upon probable cause, we can seize those items.
And it's really wild. Let's talk for a minute just about that concept of the rule of law. You mentioned a while ago, this country, 230 years, we've always had a structure of law that has existed in the country, and it is guided in a very somewhat simple process that laws are made by our legislatures, by the Congress of the United States, and these laws affect the way we do certain things, or maybe the better idea is the way we shouldn't do certain things. Do you see the rule of law as being somewhat challenged now with the ideas that you talked about a while ago, where folks have immediate access, all of a sudden it hits Facebook, 500,000 people see it, they make their mind up, and then all of a sudden you and your team sit down and look at it from the sense slicing it, very, very thin slices. This is what happened, what's been violated, what's not. But those 500,000 people only see a part of that, and they've already made their decision. So they tear something down, or they break something, which is a violation of the law.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think people need to investigate on their own. Look, if they can look at something on YouTube or on the internet, that means they have access to other sources on that very same medium. They ought to be looking up things and trying to find out what is actually the truth. And then more than that, follow up on the cases. If it is a case that's under investigation, there eventually will be some type of closure, some type of disposition. Follow the case through. Just don't simply look at the very first thing you see and then never follow up what happened after that. We have open courts in this nation. Anyone is welcome to come and view a trial or a guilty plea or any other type of motion in court. We have open courts. And I would encourage people out there that when they see or read something and they don't know, either call the district attorney's office or secondly, follow up themselves and go to court. Maybe see what actually does happen in that case. Because at that time, I can tell you, during a trial, the state will be presenting all the admissible evidence. Mm-hmm. Not just that one video they may have seen, but all the admissible evidence. Secondly, if there's a guilty plea, we will do what's called a factual basis for entry of the plea, which means we are going to summarize the evidence for the court, which means a lot of things, not just that video, not just that thing they saw on social media, but everything will be out. That way they can know what actually happened in that case.
So it actually comes down, and I won't kind of do this so folks can really get a grasp of what we're talking about here. It moves from that opinion thing of where you saw something and my opinion was, to a factual-based analysis that's put before either a jury or a judge, a body of the court, to say, here are the facts of that situation that have been analyzed, that have been decontaminated, and here's the real facts. Then the decision is made.
Absolutely. You've got to weigh all the evidence in reaching a decision, in forming an opinion. You need to weigh it all. In other words, listen to both sides, because every case has two sides. Listen to both sides. Consider the witnesses. Consider the evidence. Consider the sources of that information. Weigh it out. We all have to use our common sense on a daily basis in making decisions. You've got to do the same on that. Sometimes you've got to weigh the credibility of someone. Once now you've heard them and they've been cross-examined, do you still believe everything they said? Yeah. When you see a video, who's to say that there's not some issue about that video possibly have been edited before it was placed on YouTube? Or how about what happened before that video, what happened after the video was cut off? See, I have to deal with all those issues. I don't just look at this one thing. I've got to weigh everything out. For example, when I have a shooting incident, I will look at the videos from law enforcement. I'll look at any other videos from the citizens that have been provided. In addition to that, I will have the SBI, a neutral agency, come in and interview all the people involved about those videos to find out when they cut it off. When did they start? Why did you start it now? Why did you end it here? Was there anything else? Have you edited it in any way? I'll have those questions asked. In addition to that, I'll ask all the people at the scene as to what they saw from their perspective. And I'll take all those statements, all those videos. I will then apply the law to it. And that's the most important thing, applying the law.
A lot of citizen groups statewide, and I know you've seen a lot of these groups, promote the idea of utilizing body cameras on law enforcement officers. Yeah. Talk about the pros and cons of that for a moment from the prosecutorial end. I'm
in favor of it. I think it is an incredible tool to get to the truth. I encourage law enforcement agencies to use body cams, to turn them on, because I think it will be one of those things that can actually shed a lot of light as to what actually happened at a scene. Because otherwise, what you've got is one person saying one thing from their own perspective, an officer saying something from their perspective. Let's look at the body cam. Let's see what actually happened. And then we can also, because they have sound, we can hear what's being said. We can see the reactions of individuals. And I very much encourage law enforcement to use them. I've used them in court. I have used them in court. Now it's a two-edged sword. If the officer has done something that is not right, that is not within the bounds of the law, that violates policies, we're also going to see that. So it's a two-edged sword. It's not just to always get the person that's being charged, it's to make sure the officer's done what's right according to the policies and the law of the state of North Carolina. And I can tell you the sheriffs I work with, the police chiefs I work with, they want their officers, their deputies doing the right thing. And I would say this, look, officers, prosecutors, we've got to be different. We've got to make sure that we follow the law to the letter. We've got to set the example. If we don't, who will?
When you see these things, one of the pushbacks, not necessarily pushbacks, but one of the observations from both law enforcement and a lot of people when you look at cameras is that they do not give a totality view of the scene.
That's right.
But your point is that limited information they do give you can add value on other evidential information.
Absolutely, because then I can use that, I can look at that video, and then we can actually interview all the witnesses that were actually present and get their perspectives. In addition, then we can also weigh that against the physical evidence we find at the scene, whether it be shell casings, bullets, weapons, things such as that. We can then weigh all that, because one of the things I'm looking at is also the physical evidence. I am very much in favor of then seeing whether or not the physical evidence supports what the people said. And I look at that, I weigh it. And I can tell you, I don't do this in a vacuum either when I look at these cases. I'll have an assistant DA, sometimes two, looking at the same evidence with me. And I tell them, look, this is not simply to agree with what I think. I want you to tell me what you think and tell me. And we'll weigh it out. There have been sometimes, too, I'll look at a video, I will just have an ADA look at it. No comment. Just have them look at it, fresh eyes. I don't tell them which way I'm leaning. I want them to give me their opinion. And I've done that many times because I want to get to the truth. Ultimately, my job as a district attorney is not simply to prosecute people. My job is simply not to advise law enforcement. My job is to see that justice is done. Ultimately, that is my goal in every case, to see that justice is done.
Still talking about the rule of law,
Yes.
help us understand two kinds of things that we've seen and we continue to see a lot in media. We'll see a group of people that disagree with something, whatever it may be, whether it's a building, whether it's a statue or what have you. All of a sudden we'll see it torn down, which is a violation of the law. Then we see the other case, which is not directly in your court, but it may be, in which the federal government's trying to deal with folks that are illegal immigrants and those kinds of things, which is a clear violation of federal law. But yet there's so much protest against the law that no one seems to step back and say, well, if law is not right, let's change the law. What are we missing there? Help us understand that.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's like, look, we have a system that's put in place here that if we as a society do not like a certain law, we elect people, we have direct votes to elect those people, they can then change the laws. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to use our voice as a community to change those laws that we don't agree with. However, we are not to go take the law in our own hands, because otherwise, if everyone does that, we don't have any law at all. We have no rules, we have no order, and we're basically just a country of anarchy. And I am very much in using the system that has proven the test of time that it works. Let's use this system. And I know some people say, well, it's slow. It was meant to be slow. Our system was meant not just to be reactionary on a whim. It moves slowly. And the reason for that, our framers of the Constitution did it that way, including in North Carolina as well as the federal government, is to make sure we do what's right. We take our time on these things, we analyze it, we examine it, we weigh everything, and then make the changes in the laws. Not just reactionary, because a whim today may not be good policy for tomorrow. And we got a great system. We have a legislature here that we elect. We've got a Congress in Washington, D.C. that we elect. They're the ones who make the laws.
Absolutely. And it's not group decision, it's structural, it's system decision. Yes. So we're going to take another break. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. It seems like these breaks are coming fast. When I have the district attorney on, we get engaged in what I like to have intensive conversation. We hope you call a friend. Stay tuned. We're coming up on our last segment. We'll be back in 1 moment.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us. We talked about a lot of stuff today with the District Attorney from the 5th Prosecutorial District. District Attorney Ernie Lee represents the people here, and we've talked about laws. And Ernie, thank you for being with us. We've talked about so many things, and we always have stuff we could talk about. And when we go off air today, you and I will probably spend time talking right on, but it clearly is things that affects people's lives on a regular, daily basis, whether they realize it or not. When they walk out of their house, or even in their house, they could do something that could violate a law. You've dealt with probably more murders in the past year than you even want to talk about, and these things we look at from the media point of view and go, why did that happen? And it's hard to structuralize.
Oh, absolutely. We disposed of 18 murder cases last year in my district, which is a lot. Several of those were trials, and those were very lengthy trials. Yeah. And we got another busy year for 2019. Yeah, we've had some changes in the law this year, though. I mean, every time the legislature meets, they'll generally make some modifications or changes or amendments to the laws. We've had some additional laws come into effect. We just had one back in November. It was the Victims' Rights Act, the Victims' Rights Amendment, which passed. I mean, I'm in favor of that because I'm very much in favor of victims' rights. I would say this, though, that the legislature must also fund the resources in order to implement that. Otherwise, it's just an unfunded mandate. So I'm very much in favor of having the resources. My office spends a lot of time staying in touch with victims, all the way from the most minor offenses all the way up to murder, which means we're required to send a lot of letters to them explaining the different aspects of the case and what they can expect. And then, of course, all the dispositions. And we meet with families all the time. So we're going to need the resources to implement that. But I'm in favor of the Victims' Rights Act. I think that as long as the legislature will just make sure we have the appropriate funding to make sure we can maximize that amendment.
For our listeners out there, somebody's hearing this and they're going, okay, victim meaning somebody that their home's broken into,
right.
A victim meaning somebody that has been assaulted or raped, somebody that has had a purse stolen out of their car, a shoplift. What is considered a victim?
Victim in North Carolina is going to be anyone who's been the subject of some type of crime involving either property or their person, which means they've either been injured or they've been like assaulted or they've had property damaged or taken from them. So victim is very broad in the state of North Carolina, a very broad concept. Obviously, I deal with victims all the time on a daily basis. I just met with a family yesterday there in Onslow County who were the victim of their loved one was murdered. What this act does, though, is to make sure the victim's rights are protected. Defendants have rights under our Constitution, and they ought to, because that's our system of government, sure. Where they have the right to remain silent, they have the right to a trial by jury, they have the right to an attorney.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely, they have a right to a reasonable bond, those type things. But victims also should have rights. In other words, to be informed as to what they may expect in court, to be contacted on a regular basis to what's going on in their case, to make sure they have access to the courts and to the prosecutors. I mean, there are certain rights I think that victims should have as well, and this the Victims' Rights Act amendment actually addresses that.
When you also look at a victim, is part of that also having the victim to understand what the process is? And sometimes folks will say, and you've seen this a lot, I'm sure, where people say, it's just not worth me even thinking about prosecuting this. And it's, you know, even if it's a break-in or somebody stole your lawnmower or your weed eater or what have you, I'm just not going to even, it's not even worth reporting. But yet it is, because, you know, law enforcement and criminal justice develops patterns where people are doing things. They look at areas. All this becomes very well-needed data that moves the system forward.
Absolutely. And then also, if someone chooses not to prosecute a case that we could prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but they don't want to proceed, that means that person that committed this offense will probably do it again. They'll probably become emboldened. They got away with it one time, and they may do it again. And we've got to protect everybody. It's just not us. We've got to protect our family, our friends, our fellow citizens out there. Sure, if someone breaks in someone's house and the victim says, well, I don't want to proceed against them. Well, then how about the next victim whose house they broke into? You know, that may save them from even that happening. I'm very much in favor of victims coming forward. Look, we try to do a good job in my district of staying in contact with victims. I have legal assistants who spend an inordinate amount of time having contact with victims. I have 4 grant positions that are called Victim Service Coordinators who deal with my violent crimes, which actually they have a smaller caseload, which allows them more time to deal with the victims and the families. And I think that's been a great thing. That came through the federal government. It's one of those programs that's been outstanding. We've had it for 4 years now. And I can tell you we've got nothing but positive feedback on that, because it allows these VSCs, these Victim Service Coordinators, to actually spend more time with these victims and their families. And I'm very much in favor of that.
I don't think of anything brings that importance to that more than somebody that, like child abuse situations and those kind of things. It's horrific, and your office has folks that work very closely, I know in this area, with a group of people that ensures that these victims, these children that have been victims, have an advocate in court, because oftentimes they may not have a parent. Again, we talked about drugs and what happens with drug addicts. Sometimes, you know, the grandparents are the parents, or sometimes they are in foster care. Right. You know, I think it brings that need for victim representation important in such a clear way.
You know, I always remind my prosecutors in this district that, look, many times we're the only voice this person will have. And here's the thing about that. They don't get to pick being a victim. They didn't choose to be a victim. Secondly, they don't get to choose their prosecutor.
That's right.
And so if we are the prosecutor assigned to that case, including myself, then we've got to do our best job we can for that victim, because we are their voice in the system. They don't have a voice but for us. And I also remind all my prosecutors is, look, treat these cases like it was your family. What if it were you or your family who were victimized What would you want that prosecutor who might be assigned, wherever that might be, to do in your case? What kind of a job would you want them to do? How much contact would you want them to have with you? How much contact would you want them to have with you in explaining the system and what they can expect? And I spend a lot of time meeting with victims' families, particularly in homicide cases. I do a lot. I just did one in Sampson County just a week ago. I was over here and I met with that family for several hours. And I plan on meeting with them again very soon. Because it's so important. Most people do not have a real understanding of the criminal justice system. And because it's usually based on what they see on TV and in movies, and that is not an accurate representation. And we have got to be the ones, law enforcement and prosecutors, who help educate those people and let them know what they are facing when they get into the criminal justice system as a victim. It's a long process. It's a difficult process. It's complex, particularly those that are not learned in the law. My job is to explain it to them and to help them and lead them through it. And I can tell you, through the years, I have dealt with so many victims' families. Some from the late 1980s I still have contact with.
Wow.
And because I took the time with them to explain the case, explain what's going to be happening in court, and let them know that they're important. And that's something particularly, you mentioned the child abuse cases. These victims, many of which are of course children, very young children, we've got to reinforce for them that they are an important person and that their life matters and that they matter as a person.
Ernie, just listening to you talk, I've got to say this, and I think probably some folks are going to think, well, I'd never thought about this, but you just described a district attorney and a district attorney's office that has compassion.
Absolutely. I mean, I preach it to my assistant DAs, I preach it to my legal assistants, because first of all, it's the right thing to do, and secondly, we are their voice. And but for the grace of God, it could be us in that position one day, because none of us plan on being victims. It just happens. And we always got to be mindful of that.
And the society we're living in, we don't really know when that might happen. And the other thing that I think is important when all the conversations I've had with you is realizing that if it happens in this district, in the 4 counties that you named, somehow it's going to end up before it gets to a judge, before it gets to
Absolutely.
a court. You or your ADAs are going to have eyes on that. So as a representative of the leadership of that, folks need to understand there's not another district attorney's office you're going to on a case that's occurred in this district.
That's it. We will be your voice and we'll be the ones who advocate for you, but we'll also be the ones who explain it for you and help you get through this system. I can tell you too that it makes no difference, I've noticed this in my murder cases, that whether the victim's family is rich, poor, black, white, Hispanic, it makes no difference where they're from, all the tears are the same. And I have noticed that through the years, they're all the same. And what they want is, they want justice. They miss their loved one, but they can't get their loved one back now. However, what they want from my office is justice.
Let's hit on a couple of more things that's occurring or that you may see occurring in the legislature kind of quickly. We're coming up for closure here shortly. New kinds of things that folks might anticipate or expect to be happening legally in our district.
Well, we've had, there's been a new law passed in Raleigh, I think it's a good law, trying to protect those individuals who are guarding the inmates, particularly in the Department of Adult Correction. That has been an issue for quite some time. The legislature addressed it. I can tell you the Conference of DAs, which I'm a member of, supported this legislation to make stricter punishments for those inmates who are throwing such, for example, bodily fluids on the prison personnel, because it is such a health issue. HIV, hepatitis, those type things becomes a health issue. And that is one of the things the legislature did. They made it quite a strict punishment as well.
Well, we're going to look at these kinds of things. It's going to be an ongoing process, and as I look at the picture now in our society, the district attorneys throughout the state and their offices are really part of that structure that keeps society stable. I mean, without that, it would be like Venezuela.
That's right. That's right. I mean, we're part of this orderly society that we should live in.
We want to thank you for being with us. Time has flown. We go by fast. We welcome you back at this table anytime you have a chance. Come back by, and it's always good to talk about civic issues. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you again next week on Channel 16, Star Communications, WCLN Radio, and Sampson Weekly Newspaper. And as we always say, may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.